Let's get started.
Mhm.
Nice to see you here. So today we were going to address some of the obstacles or challenges um, that you might see in developing your teaching practice or growing your teaching practice. And I've kind of been gathering up questions that I'm asked or that have been asked in the face-to-face teacher trainings that I hope to begin to address today. And our discussion is likely going to take some tangents, but I do hope to cover a couple of things. Can I teach poses that I don't demonstrate or that I don't demonstrate all of the progressions for? Um, some poses don't work for my body. Do I have to teach them? Can I adjust the sequence? There's a question, and this is sort of a perennial question about feeling uneasy about charging for yoga classes or private yoga sessions, receiving money for teaching yoga. And the fourth one was feeling uncomfortable about marketing yourself in advertising or social media, putting yourself out there. So those are the four things that I've kind of committed to talking about, but I hope that you've also all brought questions, obstacles, or challenges that you're facing or that you see yourself facing in the future, or that you have some insights to share on some of the challenges that are posed here. If you've got some ideas or experience or wisdom to share, we'd love to hear it. So to start, can I teach poses that I don't demonstrate? And my answer to that is yes, mostly. In the case of our basic vinyasa flow postures, yes, absolutely, you can teach techniques that you don't currently practice or demonstrate all of the versions of. So you might demo the first regressed version of the pose and maybe discuss the pose basics, and then offer students cues to progress the pose beyond what you're demonstrating. So for example, if you aren't extending a straight leg in Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, our extended standing hand to big toe balancing pose, where you catch your toe, you might demonstrate the bent knee version of that pose and then talk students through the progressions, right? So you don't have to demonstrate every level of a pose in order to effectively teach it. The caveat here is when it comes to more advanced postures, especially as a new teacher, you might leave those out of your teaching for now. And if you've got students who are really keen on those, refer those students to a teacher who can guide them on poses that you don't practice. So here I'm talking about poses like the big inversions, headstand, handstand, shoulder stand, and maybe more stronger or more complex poses that don't have a lot of accessible options, like firefly and forearm balance and any of the legs behind the head poses. Um, I don't recommend teaching those, and I do recommend having someone that you can refer your students to if they're wanting to progress their practice in that direction. So for now, especially if you're a newer teacher, study your vinyasa flow poses, use versions that work best for you. And then if there are versions of a pose that you can't safely use in your own practice or when you're teaching, know that you might need some extra study to understand the intricacies of that pose. So you might take some extra time to study. You might take some extra time to maybe teach those poses to some volunteers. Um, and in particular, it would be great if you had an experienced yogi or even a teacher to be a practice student for that. So that you can inquire about what are the sensations, what are the actions, what cues work. And this is going to fill your toolbox of teaching strategies so that when you won't be demonstrating, you've got solid teaching strategies to guide students through the progression of a pose, right? When you're not demonstrating. Um, each pose has an essence and some key elements that remain regardless of which version or which props we use or how much we progress the pose. So getting to know your pose essence is going to help you develop that deep knowledge of the postures. So that's what I have to say about that subject. I'm curious if anyone here has any thoughts, ideas, insights, wisdom to share on that. So if you're pregnant, if you're injured, if it's your fifth class of the day and your body's feeling really tired, like for whatever reason, you're not demonstrating the full progression of a pose, then yeah, you can cue students through it, right? Having an understanding of the pose obviously is your foundation. And then being able to use verbal cues or use gestures or semi demos to help to guide students into that progression, that's enough for your students. They don't need to see you in the full pose every time. And sometimes it's just not available. Sometimes as a teacher, you're not warm enough because you're not demonstrating fully every pose and every pose flow. Sometimes in the case of balancing poses, if the effort to maintain your own balancing pose takes your attention off of your students, don't demonstrate that whole balancing pose. Demonstrate a little bit, get out, stand both feet on the ground, cue them through it, right? Use some gestures. Because let's remember that teaching yoga isn't a performance about what you can do with your body. You're instructing students about how they can have an experience with their bodies. So whilst your visual demonstrations and visual cueing are really useful, they're not the only teaching strategy that you've got, right? So that's something useful to keep in mind, I hope. Our friend Robin Lewis from Yoga Enlightenment, she teaches the chair yoga teacher training. She talks about bus stops. And she talks about, beginning the pose with the most regressed version, building the pose from the ground up. And then you can get off at any bus stop along the way. So first we'll start with a hand on the wall and stepping up onto a tiptoe. Then we'll lift the foot off the ground. Then we'll bring the knee up to the chest and fingertips touch the knees. And as a teacher, you're offering people these bus stops, right? And then watching to see if your bus has driven a little further than anyone wants to go today, right? So that's when you can stop your offering progressions. Because the challenge is if you're always demonstrating a progressed version and you're cueing progressions beyond where all of your students are going, it can sometimes inadvertently create a culture for your students where they think, oh, we should be always progressing. Like what we're doing isn't enough. We're supposed to be going further, further, further. And so you want to be sure that students understand that every bus stop is a good bus stop. There's great stuff to experience, and they don't have to always be thinking about progressing poses or adding new bus stops to their routine, right? So that's a really good point and something to think about. And again, that comes from our friend Robin Lewis, who teaches the chair yoga teacher training that I've mentioned before. Yeah, so let's talk about our next question, which is, there's a pose that doesn't work for my body. Do I have to teach it? And do I have to include it in the sequence? And my answer to that is no and yes. If there's a pose or a pose version that isn't working for your body, or it isn't working for your student population, you're seeing that your students aren't taking up this pose, then adapt it, prop it, try a different version, or find another pose that meets the same essence. So, trade a balancing pose for a balancing pose, or an arm strengthening pose for another arm strengthening pose, right? And this question actually came up relative to powerful pose. So maybe I'll address that here as an example. If powerful pose doesn't work for your body, you can reduce the number of powerful poses. So first up, you can reduce the number of powerful poses in your sun salutations. I added powerful pose to sun salutations A, and then made up the other two versions of sun salutations we use, half standing vinyasa and hands-free vinyasa. So there's no reason why you can't take the powerful poses out of there if you're feeling like it's too much, or you're seeing your students are finding that it's too much. But maybe before you take all the powerful poses away, you might explore some different ways of practicing powerful pose. So a couple of recommendations for Utkatasana is first, widen your stance. And this is a good sort of basic adjustment to make anytime you're having trouble with a pose. Add some space to your base. Your feet don't have to be together for a powerful pose. And for many people, feet together doesn't work, right? So you can try stepping your feet a little bit wider, see if that makes the pose more comfortable for you or for your students. Secondly, you can take your arms more forward than overhead. For lots of people, when they try to bring their biceps beside their ears, which is one of the common cues you might have heard out in the yoga world, trying to bring the arms all the way up so biceps are beside the ears can cause two problems for some people. For some folks, it causes a lift of the rib cage, which really increases spinal extension, the deep curve in the back, which might create some tension or discomfort. And for some folks, trying to bring the arms all the way beside the ears creates a lot of shoulder discomfort, right? So instead of insisting on the arms getting to a particular place, you might keep the arms more forward, maybe a 45-degree angle, and see if you can maintain your shoulder comfort and your spinal alignment that way. See if that adds a little bit of comfort to powerful pose. So you can focus on the real challenges of powerful pose and not discomforts like your shoulders, right? Thirdly, is find an alignment that works for your pelvis. So you'll find that in my teaching, if you're doing the classes in the library, my general cue is to keep a small curve in the lower back so that the spine remains relatively neutral. So the same shapes you have when you're standing, a little kyphosis or posterior curve in the upper back, and a little lordosis, anterior curve in your lower back, right? Keeping those curves as you come into powerful pose. So that's my general cue. But it doesn't work for everybody. For some students, their pelvis overly spills forward. If we think about the pelvis being a bucket of water, when we come into powerful pose, we want the pelvis to tip slightly forward, but not be pouring water out the front. And if you can't control that, or that's creating discomfort, you might bring the bucket of water more upright. Can you feel that in your body just now sitting? You might bring your bucket of water more upright and see if that creates more comfort. What this is going to look like on the outside is a flatter lower back, so less of that natural lordotic curve. But if that creates more comfort for you and helps you contain that pose, then I think that's a really good choice to make. You might hear that action cued as things like lengthen your tailbone, which is a feeling you might get from that. That's generally not the way that I cue it, but that's something you might hear in the world. I tend to talk a little bit more about the bucket of water, or if you do this with me, take your thumbs to your front ribs and your pinky fingers to your front hip bones, the sticky outy bones in the front of your hips, and try to bring those points just a little bit closer together and feel your core doing that work, right? Can you feel that? And then keep that as you move into powerful pose so that you're not kind of abandoning those spinal stabilizers and pelvic stabilizers as you come into the pose, and see if that gives you a little bit more control, a little bit more stability, right? What's another thing? Powerful pose, make it a bit smaller. So this is something I've had to do in my own powerful pose, because the powerful pose we're working with is equal angles at your hips, your knees, and your ankles. Since I broke my ankle, it doesn't bend as much. Well, the other one's fine, but I can't bend my ankles as much. So my choice, and there's many options, many choices I could make, but my choice is to keep the equal angles version. And because my ankle doesn't move as much, I'm not moving my knees as much, and I'm not moving my hips as much, right? So I'm making all the joint movements just that little bit smaller, and that's what's been comfortable for me. So that's another option, is make your powerful pose smaller. It doesn't have to be super deep if it's not working for any of those joints, your ankles, your knees, or your hips. And then finally, let me just say again, if powerful pose isn't working for you or your students in every version of sun salutations that you're teaching, skip it. You might take out powerful pose from those first 3 versions of sun salutations and just keep it where it traditionally is in sun salutations B, right? I added powerful pose, you can subtract it, okay? Reason I added powerful pose is that for the students that I was working with, people were starting to get some back pain from all the swan diving forward, the straight leg forward fold. And for people who had less flexibility in their forward fold, I noticed that if they did a straight leg forward fold, their back was rounding a lot, which isn't inherently dangerous. It's just not the yoga alignment. Their back was rounding a lot, and they were less inclined to bend their knees if their legs were already straight. Whereas if we enter that forward fold, Uttanasana, in sun salutations, from a powerful pose, the knees are already bent. So there's already encourages that deep hip flexion that we're looking for from that pose. And then you can work to straighten your legs once you're in Uttanasana. So that was my choice to add powerful pose for those alignment concerns. And also because I like strengthening. So I like the idea of having some more strengthening poses, especially for a lot of the students I work with primarily do yoga as their movement practice. So finding opportunities to strengthen was important to me. But again, I added it, you can subtract it, right? If that flow isn't working for you. I know some people really miss the swan dive forward, and that's understandable. It feels flourishy and nice. So you can keep that. Okay, let's talk about our next subject, which is feeling uneasy about taking money for teaching yoga. And this is a common challenge for many new teachers, especially for teachers who don't come from a background of self-employment or doing gig work, who aren't accustomed to taking money for things. You go to work and your pay arrives in your bank account and you don't have to deal with it. But it is really important, especially if teaching yoga is going to be a career rather than a free community offering that you do. It is important that you spend some time getting comfortable with receiving payments, right? So a couple of things. Firstly, just if this is a concern for you, take some time to consider if you would go to any other type of job without being compensated for your training and your time and your skills and expertise. Even when you first start as a new teacher and you feel like you're still developing your skills, you have made an investment in your training and you are qualified to teach and you have something important to share. And if you're teaching your own classes, you have expenses related to those classes. So for all those reasons, it's completely reasonable to be compensated for that. You wouldn't expect anyone else to not be compensated for that, would you? No. So you can be compensated for that too. The other thing to think about is that it can make your students feel anxious and embarrassed to not have a clear process for registration, payment, arriving and departing class. And you want to make that a smooth process for your students. So that's part of your teaching, is to make that a smooth process. Some teachers like to start their classes, with a gold coin donation or pay what you can or some kind of discount for the first period of your teaching. That's fine. You just want to be really clear about what that will look like and prepare your students for that. And the practicalities, like what payment types are you receiving, how to do that, right? And you also want to be really clear about when that discounted period will end, right? I'll give you an example of this. My mom, who really likes to support local practitioners, found out there was a new reflexologist in our town and wanted to go and have reflexology and support this new business. And she went and had this really wonderful reflexology treatment. And then at the end, the lady was like really awkward about taking money. I was like, what? You know, just pay what you think it's worth. And that, like, I was like, what? Sorry, the onus is on me now to put a value on your service. Like, it made her so uncomfortable. Like, what do we want to pay for reflexology? We want to pay the least amount that we can without insulting a person. We want to compensate someone for their time, but not overcompensate, right? Like, what's that number? Just give me a number, I'll write you a check, right? In Canada, we write checks. Sorry, you guys haven't seen those for a long time. But like, don't put the onus on your students to put a value on your classes. That's your job, to put the value on your classes, right? Otherwise, it can make it. Did my mom go back to that reflexologist? No. Because what experience was she left with? She wasn't left with the beautiful, peaceful, calm, relaxed feeling from her treatment. She was left with, I don't want to have to be in that awkward situation again with payment. Like, I didn't like that. So do your students a favor by making that process smooth, whether it's group classes that you're teaching or private sessions. You work out how people are going to register and make payment and come and go from your class, and make that process smooth for them, right? I don't have words for this because I don't know a lot about human relationships, but like, it's like saying, how much do you like me? And like, there's something there, that an undercurrent that I don't like. It's just, say what your class costs. It's okay. You can just say what your class costs. No trouble. If you want to have a sliding scale, have a sliding scale. If you want to offer free positions or by donation positions in your class, but not all of them are, you can do that. If you want to have scholarship positions in your class for people who maybe can't afford your classes, absolutely, you can do that. All of those things are available. I don't like putting the onus on students to put a value on your classes. I think it sets up a dynamic that kind of isn't cool. And having said all that about, yes, you can have bio-donation classes, you do want to be a little bit cautious with that. It can create conflict in your local yoga community. If you come along as a new teacher and start your teaching practice by offering by donation classes or heavily discounted yoga classes to the existing yoga community, that can look like you're undercutting their value, and it can affect the whole community. So it might feel like, and I've had lots of teachers reflect on this, it might feel like you're saying, I know you're an experienced teacher, so you charge $20 a class, but I'm this new person. I can't charge that because I'm not as good as you. So I'll charge $5 for my classes. And that experienced teacher looks at, like, now my students are leaving to go to your $5 classes. And you've done it for reasons that you think are noble, but the result could be that it really disrupts the balance and integrity of your yoga community. So you might want to think about that before offering those heavily discounted classes, which I know that people do because they feel like they're new and they're still developing their teaching practice. But you do want to think about the balance of your yoga community and how the community values yoga, right? What your community thinks is the amount of money you pay for a yoga class. And especially if you've got outlays of, hiring a venue and buying props and all of the things that you do to run a class, you do need to be compensated for that, right? So that's something to think about. There can be a feeling like, I'm not worthy of taking money for this teaching. I'm not worthy of charging the same as an experienced teacher for my classes. But you are. Yeah. Because as a student teacher, don't charge, right? Until you've got a certification, don't be charging for your classes. But once you've received your certification and you've paid for your insurance and you've hired your venue, you do need to start charging for your classes. You can offer a discounted, period of time if that's more comfortable for you. But a word of advice, be very clear about when that discounted period ends. Otherwise, you might have a student 3 years down the track still paying you $5 a class because it wasn't clear. And some people will take a little bit of advantage of your discomfort with taking money. So you want to be super clear about what's happening, and when that discounted period or that buy donation or whatever period is going to end. For me, one of the things I want to remember is that for me, how I run my business is part of my yoga practice and it's part of my yoga teaching. So for me, I think of it as a form of teaching or modeling, valuing yourself and your time and your energy and your expertise. Even if your expertise is still just a little seed, it's something that you've put a lot of time and effort into. And so it's important for me, and it might be important for you, to model that, you see your value and you see your worth, and let your students see that. That's another form of teaching, right? And it shows your students that their time and their attention is also valuable, that you're putting a value on this time you're spending together, right? So that's something to think about as well, is what you're modeling to your students in the way that you operate your business, which again, I consider a part of my yoga practice. Even when I'm on my Excel spreadsheets, I'm doing yoga. Yeah. This isn't all about money, but money is the way that our capitalist society has decided to put value on things and help us exchange goods and services and energy. Right? You paid money to do this course, to become a yoga teacher, to do this thing that means so much to you. That's your heart's passion. And you need to take money for that. Just because you love something and you love sharing it doesn't mean you can't get paid for it. It's kind of the whole point of having this amazing job, right? That we can do something we really love and buy groceries. Yeah. Because your landlord or bank won't take cuddles for payment. So moving on, I want to talk about the other subject that I've been talking about, because I feel this too. I feel uncomfortable marketing myself on social media. And this is a comment I get from lots of students. I do too. But you kind of have to, because you can be the best yoga teacher in the world, but if you can't tell anyone about your classes, how are they going to find you? They don't just see a rainbow over the community hall and waft in there. Like, they need to know about you, and they need to know about your classes, and they need to know both about what's the experience going to be like, and kind of the vibe aspect, and they also need to know the practicalities. What time are your classes? Where are they? How much do they pay for them? Right? And so you are using social media to do that informing, both about your vibes and about the practicalities of your classes. So sometimes the discomfort of marketing yourself, whether it be on a website or social media or anywhere, sometimes that discomfort comes from having ideas about those people who promote themselves being arrogant or up themselves or pushy, right? Sometimes we can get that feeling, right? Especially in Australia, there's sometimes kind of an inherent concern about standing out too much. That cultural foundation of tall poppy syndrome, right? You can't stick your head up too high or it'll be lopped off. And I understand that. I understand that that's a unique issue that people in Australia can face. But you can market yourself without being up yourself. You can market yourself without being arrogant. You can market yourself without ever talking about yourself, in fact, right? All of your marketing, it doesn't have to actually be about you. It could be about the experience. It could be about yoga. Like your marketing could be all about the benefits of yoga. Your marketing could be all about the students. What kinds of students come to my classes? What did they experience? What did they say about the classes, right? um, it doesn't have to be about you, and you don't have to put pictures of yourself doing yoga on the internet if that's not comfortable for you, right? There's other ways of marketing. You don't have to talk yourself up. Heather's the greatest yoga teacher in the world, said Heather. Like, you don't have to do that if that's not comfortable for you, but you do have to somehow tell the world that you're teaching yoga and you have classes and you'd like them to come along, right? So finding a way that's going to be comfortable to do that, right? um, you can just talk up yoga if that's a more comfortable space for you, right? Rather than talking up yourself. Yeah. Both with this and the previous concern about taking money for teaching, I think that there's an opportunity for self-evaluation here when you feel safe and ready for that, should you want to. Um, like, is there a concern about not feeling that there's a value in what you're offering? Do you have concerns about receiving compensation for your teaching? Like, do you have concerns about you being representative of yoga? Like, do I look like a yoga teacher? Am I going to put myself doing yoga on the internet? Like, if those are your concerns, I think that when you feel safe and ready to do so, it's a great opportunity for self-evaluation and perhaps addressing some of those concerns. If you're not ready to do that self-evaluation and you don't feel ready to take money for your classes and you don't feel ready to put yourself on the internet, hi, I'm a yoga teacher, then you go teach for someone else for a bit. Develop your skills. Just as Shirley was saying, develop your skills, build your confidence, get to know your worth, and then run your own classes, right? When you teach at the gym, when you teach at a yoga studio, you don't have to market yourself, and you're not really taking money because all that's happening digitally through the app or whatever payment gateway the studio or the gym provides. So you can just focus on teaching and developing your teaching skills and your student management skills and developing your confidence. And then you'll know when you're ready to go out and start getting more comfortable with marketing yourself and those kinds of things if that's not comfortable for you right now. I really think that's a great pathway to teaching and to developing a business. That first you focus on teaching for someone else where you can just focus on the students and how you're teaching them. And then over time, you can develop a business. When I was teaching yoga to the general public, which I don't really do so much anymore, I would have my own classes like in a community hall, and then private sessions in someone's home, and then corporate classes, and then teaching in gyms or yoga studios. And absolutely the hardest work is running your own classes because you've got to do the marketing and the admin and bring your trolley of props and open up the space and turn the heaters on. And depending on how you've organized your classes, if they're drop-in classes, yeah, you'll never know who's coming to class, right? If I was to run my own classes again, I would run them in blocks where people had to commit to 10 weeks or whatever, because I'm not willing to do that anymore. There's too many reasons. I know, because I feel this. There's too many reasons to not go to yoga, right? And if there's been no commitment from the student on a Sunday afternoon, why would they come if they found something more interesting to do, like lay in a hammock in the sun? So the relief when you're running a yoga business of being able to just walk into the gym or the studio and teach a class and walk out, like, it allows you to just focus on teaching, right? I love running a yoga business and I love all those other parts of it, but it does take time and it can be tiring. So for me, it was great to have that balance of my own classes, plus the classes I taught for other people, plus corporate classes. to have a full-time yoga career, that's kind of what you need to do, is have a range of things going on, so that if you have that Sunday class like Shirley was talking about, where you've booked the venue and you've paid $50 for the hour and then only one person comes, then that's kind of subsidized by the other things that you do while you build up those classes, should that be something that you want to do, right? Running your own classes, I'll say, generally takes about 2 years of consistent effort to get then a consistent base of students, right? Your first couple months, your first couple of years are usually big chunks of people signing up and then fading away, and then another big chunk of people signing up and then fading away. And then over time, you end up with a solid group of students that can be relied upon and that can rely on you, right? But those are some things, if you haven't done your business basics unit yet, those are some things we talk about in business basics. And maybe we should organize a business talk again sometime soon, just to talk about all those, the ins and outs of all the different ways that you might be teaching, and all the pros and cons of all of those elements, right? All right, I'm going to finish up by saying just something about Tall Poppy. As a new Australian, when I moved to Australia, I did not understand this thing because we don't have it in Canada. We don't have it in North America. We're like allowed to be proud of ourselves if we accomplish something. And so if I can offer you the invitation to maybe say that it's okay to be proud of what you do and keen to share it, and keen to share your love of yoga with others, that that's not being arrogant, that's being full of enthusiasm and wanting to share things with others. And if that feels really uncomfortable, just like practicing crow pose, you might have to practice talking about this thing that you're offering yoga, and it might take some practice to overcome that cultural barrier of being able to talk your classes up a little bit. And so you might add that to your list of things to start practicing while you practice all the other elements of teaching yoga. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and bringing your questions and your insights and your experiences, and helping us talk about some of the obstacles and challenges and questions we have as we develop a teaching practice. Hello to those of you who are listening, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week. Thank you. Thanks so much.